You know, in the high-stakes world of geopolitics, survival is never, ever guaranteed. So today, we're unpacking the incredible story of Singapore, a tiny island nation that completely defied the odds to become a global powerhouse. We're going to break down the security playbook that made it all happen, and it's a true masterclass in what international relations experts call defensive realism.
And that brings us to the central puzzle, right? How does a nation, that famous little red dot on the map, actually secure its existence when it's literally wedged between two regional giants? Look, this isn't just some academic question. For Singapore, it has been the defining question of survival since day one.
To really get the strategy, you first have to understand the starting point. I mean, it was bleak. In 1965, Singapore didn't just become independent, it was kicked out of the Malaysian Federation. It had practically nothing. No resources, a tiny population, a non-existent military, all while dealing with deep-seated ethnic tensions and being surrounded by much larger and, frankly, not always friendly neighbors.
The scale of this challenge is just staggering. Just look at these numbers. You've got 3.6 million Singaporean citizens up against Malaysia's 34 million and Indonesia's 284 million. This is the absolute definition of a David versus Goliath scenario. And a situation like that forces a country to think completely differently about what security even means. So how in the world did they solve this problem? Well, first, we need to dig into the fundamental hurdles Singapore was up against, the unchangeable facts of its geography and its history. Okay, so Singapore's strategy was basically forged by four inescapable constraints. First, its tiny size means it has zero strategic depth. An enemy jet can cross its entire airspace in just a few minutes. It has no natural resources. It famously depended on Malaysia just for its water supply. Its small population really limits its military manpower. And its economy is completely dependent on global trade, which leaves it vulnerable to shocks way beyond its control.
And on top of all those constraints, two defining crises basically burned this sense of vulnerability right into the national psyche. The first, of course, was its sudden expulsion from Malaysia. The second was Indonesia's Confront AC, a guerrilla campaign that actually included bombings right there in Singapore itself. These weren't abstract threats on a map, they were real, immediate dangers that made survival the nation's absolute #1 priority.
So given all these challenges, a nation has to pick a strategic philosophy, right? In the world of international relations, this often comes down to a framework called realism. But as we're about to see, there are two very different paths a country can take down that road. So the basic idea of structural realism is pretty simple. There's no world government, no global 911 you can call for help. In this Antarctic system, every country is basically on its own. And they're all rational actors focused on one primary goal above all else: their own survival.
Now, within this realist worldview, you've got two competing ideas. On one hand, there's offensive realism. This says the only way to be safe is to become the biggest, baddest state around, to go for total dominance. But all that aggression usually just leads to more conflict. On the other hand, you have defensive realism. It argues for a different path. Be a security maximizer, not a power maximizer. The goal is to build enough strength to defend yourself, but do it cautiously so you don't provoke your neighbors and spark an arms race. For a small state like Singapore, the choice was pretty clear.
So, Singapore chose the path of defensive realism. But what does that actually look like in practice? Let's break down the specific plays from their survival playbook. And really, nothing captures the stakes better than this quote from Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, just months after independence. It was a simple question of survival or being destroyed by others. It wasn't about ambition or glory. It was just a stark, binary choice between survival and total destruction. And that mindset, it drove every single decision that followed.
And just look at how quickly they moved. In 1965, there was a complete security vacuum. By 1967, they had introduced mandatory military service or national service, modeled on the Israeli system, to build a citizen army from the ground up. And by 1971, they had co-founded a key defensive pact, the FPDA. This was a rapid, almost desperate, and incredibly focused effort to build a real defense from absolutely nothing.
And you know what? That citizen army is still the backbone of its defense today. An active force of about 51,000 can be boosted by over 250,000 reservists. For a nation this small, that level of potential mobilization sends a very, very powerful message about its will to survive.
This brings us to their famous poison shrimp doctrine. The idea is brilliant and simple. You might be small, but you have to be so potent, so dangerous, that anyone who tries to swallow you will be fatally poisoned.
Singapore did this by pouring money into advanced technology as a force multiplier to make up for its limited number of soldiers. They made some bold moves, like showing off modern tanks in 1969, but they balanced it with a clever strategy of defense creep, buying new weapons gradually to avoid freaking out their neighbors. It's deterrence and restraint in perfect balance.
But having a strong military was only half the equation. Singapore used diplomacy as its shield. It was a founding member of ASEAN, always pushing for regional cooperation. It helped establish the five-power defense arrangements to build trust with Malaysia and powerful outside partners. And it conducts regular joint military exercises with its neighbors to boost transparency and lower the risk of some disastrous miscalculation.
But as we all know, in the modern world, threats aren't just military anymore, so Singapore realized its strategy had to evolve, expanding from a national defense concept to this idea of total defense that involves the entire society.
And this is where it gets really interesting. This is the idea that security is about so much more than just the military. Singapore's total defense framework is built on 6 pillars. It recognizes that a strong economy, a unified society, and a resilient population are just as vital to national security as any tank or fighter jet. It's an approach that truly enlists every single citizen in the defense of the nation. And this strategy never, ever stops evolving. The newest pillar, digital defense, was just added in 2019 to combat the modern threats that blur the lines between war and peace. I'm talking about things like cyber attacks, foreign influence operations, and disinformation campaigns. It's all about defending the nation in every single domain, physical and virtual. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from Singapore's incredible story? Let's try to distill it down to its core elements, and then ask the final big question. Is this a model that other small states can actually follow? When you boil it all down, Singapore's recipe for survival is this masterful blend of 4 key ingredients. 1. Build a credible but not threatening military. 2. Pursue relentless diplomacy to build trust. 3. Foster resilience across your entire society. And 4, maybe the most important, exercise strategic restraint. It's a really difficult balancing act, but it's one they've successfully maintained for over half a century.
Which leaves us with one final vital question. Was Singapore's success a total one-off, a unique miracle born of a specific time, place, and culture? Or does its defensive playbook offer a genuine blueprint for survival that other small states can actually follow in our increasingly uncertain world? The answer to that has some pretty profound implications for the future of international security.